You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 112. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Hello, my friend. Welcome to today's podcast episode. I'm so pleased you've decided to join because today we are talking about you. You as a leader. Yes, you. Today's podcast episode is inspired by the first group of women that just completed the 6-month group coaching and mastermind program that I offer. You may have heard me speak about it on the podcast before. We started in January and we just finished up last week. I'm running another program. It just started. There are 8 women in that group. There are women who are interested in joining in January's session. If that includes you, what I'm going to do is open registration so that you can register in advance. So if that interests you, please look out for that. There will be a link in the show notes with this episode. And the reason that I think it's so important to talk about leadership and to share some of the experience of that group is that one of the beautiful things that emerged from our time together is that within that community of women, there was this theme of leadership. There was a theme of women coming together in community and talking about their career goals, sharing in the experiences, the opportunities, the challenges, and to see how everyone's confidence grew, how they emerged as leaders was so impactful. And I could see from what we did over those 6 months that the next level in terms of where I'm going to take my practice is to build up a community of leaders. And I want everybody to be a leader. I want all of you to be a leader in your lives, the leading lady of your lives, at work, outside of work, wherever you choose. And so today's podcast episode is about stepping into leadership because it matters. I'm going to tackle leadership in 3 headings. The first is how you may not currently see yourself as a leader and why that matters. The second is about how leadership is more than having leadership qualities. And third, I'm going to offer concrete steps that you can take to step into your authority as a leader. Starting with that first point, how you may not currently see yourself as a leader and why that matters. If you do not see yourself as a leader right now, I would invite you to ask yourself why. Now, it may be that there are factors that are outside of you that influence you when it comes to leadership. So your environment may be such that you do not see yourself as a leader when you're in it. It may be that in your work, there is an absence of leaders that you can relate to, and so you don't see leadership as being for you. Now, this may resonate more strongly with those of you who are in an organization that is more male-dominated. Now, I am not being critical of men. I have worked for many incredible men throughout my career. And so this is not to say that they should not lead. But what I am saying here is that sometimes it can be hard to see yourself as a leader if the models in front of you don't look like you, don't sound like you, don't necessarily have the same interests as you. And so what I would invite you to consider is, are you in an environment where the leaders are ones that are hard for you to relate to? Now, this can be equally true of women. This is not just a men thing. But are you surrounded by people who you could emulate yourself after or not? It may be that in the environment that you're in, you do not feel valued. And so you ask yourself what you could possibly offer as a leader. Now, what does that mean? What I mean by that is that sometimes you have skills that are highly valuable. And yet in the place where you are, those skills aren't necessarily skills that are valued in the organization. And so if that is something that you can relate to, I would ask yourself whether or not that is a reason that is holding you back from stepping into leadership. Now, another way that your environment might be influencing you, and this I'm hoping does not apply to you, but sometimes it will, is if you're in a toxic work environment. Now, if you're in an environment where you feel like your self-esteem, your self-confidence are being eroded because of a way that you're being treated, then that may also influence your self-perception and how you see yourself in relation to leadership. If your confidence gets undermined to the point that you no longer feel like you have something to offer, that you have what it takes to be a leader, then that can also influence you. So these are some examples of how your external environment may be shaping the way that you see yourself in relation to leadership. Now, there are also internal factors, and I don't think these are airtight containers. Your internal and external factors they're fluid, right? It's almost like you could see a porous membrane between the two, and there's a flow of information that goes between those two. So internally, you may not see yourself as somebody who is a leader. You may see leadership as a quality that belongs to other people, but not to you. When you think of leadership, you might feel self-doubt. You may feel imposter syndrome. You may feel a lack of confidence, and you may question yourself and your ability to lead. You may feel like you don't belong as a leader, and you may not see the value that you personally could contribute in a leadership role. Now, if you don't see yourself as a leader, this matters. And what I am inviting you to consider is that you are a leader, that you can choose to be a leader. And the reason this is important is because when you see yourself as a leader, then you create at your capacity and beyond, instead of limiting yourself to what others may ask of you. You may have listened to a podcast episode I recorded about confidence and closing the confidence gap. And the reason that I think that is so important is because if you see yourself as not confident, if you see yourself even at 80%, I would invite you to think about what you're doing and you're not doing at 80% relative to what you would be doing if you were 100% confident. So imagine yourself at 100% confident. What are you doing when you feel that way that you're not currently doing? And I would invite you to ask yourself the same question when it comes to leadership. If you saw yourself as a leader, how would you be showing up differently? What would you be doing more that you're not doing today? How would you see yourself differently as a leader relative to how you're seeing yourself today? When you choose to lead, you develop your confidence. You create your own unique brand of value. You cultivate your sense of purpose and you bring or generate a greater sense of fulfillment. And then you set the example for others. Going back to that example, if you're in an environment where you do not see leaders who are like you, now all of a sudden you are that leader. You are the leader that other people like you can relate to. You are the leader for whom other people can see themselves in you. And you may help others feel courageous, expansive, and confident because of your influence. Now, I mentioned the second point that I wanted to share with you is how being a leader is more than having leadership qualities. Now, typically on this podcast, I invite you to not see the world as black and white. I invite you to not have a binary way of thinking. But here I'm going to invite you to think of this a little bit differently. I'm going to ask you to consider leadership as a choice. Now, leadership is something that may show up differently depending on where you are and what you do. And leadership can come to you in different ways. Sometimes a position of leadership is offered to you. Sometimes you are elected for a position of leadership. Sometimes you emerge informally as a leader. And leadership may carry different labels. It might carry the label of partnership, for example. It might be a management position. It might be a board appointment. It might be a political position. It might be a particular role within a professional organization. There's lots of different ways leadership can unfold. And what I invite you to look at right now is to consider areas of your life where you're already leading, informally or formally, and also to look at areas of your life where there's an opportunity for you to lead. And in those areas, what I would love for you to ask yourself is whether you have made a conscious choice to lead. And when I talk about choosing leadership, here's what I mean. Going back to that binary black and white, there's a difference between being a person who has leadership qualities and being a person who chooses to lead. The way I see it, it's almost like there's a circle, and in the middle of that circle is the word leader. And what I invite you to consider is whether or not, if you were to have that image in your own mind, there's leader with a circle around it, are you inside of that circle, or is leadership an other? When you think of leaders, who, in your view, gets to be a leader? Do you yourself get to be a leader? And if you are allowed to be a leader, if you see yourself as being invited, capable, having that as an option for you, are you willing to step into that circle with both feet? So again, look at those areas of your life where there's an opportunity for leadership. Are you willing to say yes? What would be different for you if you chose to lead? Would you feel empowered? Would you feel terrified? Would you feel purposeful, grounded, important? And what impact are you capable of making when you choose to lead? So going back to the 3 topics, we've covered how you may not currently see yourself as a leader and why it's important for you to see yourself as a leader. We have talked about how leadership is a choice. You can be a person who has leadership qualities, and you can choose to be a leader. You can step into that circle and become a leader. And finally, what I'd love to share with you are some strategies that you can consider when you choose to step into leadership. There's 4 strategies altogether. So the first is following up on that idea of leadership as a choice, as this binary, you can become it. And I'd invite you to stop seeing leadership as an other, as something that is not for you, and to start seeing yourself as a leader. If leadership is written in that circle and you currently see that as something apart from you, that is something for others, people who are not like you, I would invite you to make a choice that it in fact is. I'd invite you to step into leadership. I would invite you to ask yourself what leadership looks like for you. You can develop your own code of ethics. You can develop your own guiding principles. You can develop a leadership style. You may have heard this in relation to style for your outerwear, having a personal style statement where you pick 3 different adjectives and then you create your wardrobe around those 3 words. What if you were to do that the same way for your leadership style? What are some of the words that you would choose for your leadership style? Maybe it's vision, courage, connection, innovation, empowerment. And when you think about that leadership style, you think about your code of ethics, your guiding principles. When you choose that form of leadership, what does that version of leadership feel like to you? Does it feel like a sense of purpose? Do you feel confident, strong, willing, Do you feel a sense of authority, influence, power? And when you act from that place, what do you do? How do you speak? What ideas do you choose to express? What opportunities do you create or seek out? Who do you choose to surround yourself with? What risks are you willing to take? Who do you stand up for? Whose opinions matter to you? And what boundaries are you willing to set? So once you've done that first exercise of seeing yourself as a leader and defining what that looks like for you, I would invite you to lead yourself first. How you lead yourself is the starting point for leadership, and it is a fertile source for leadership training. I promise you, everything that you do to lead yourself, every challenge you have, every opportunity you have, is one that then translates itself to your leadership of others. So if you seek to be a leader who is compassionate, inspiring, and dependable, you must first be those things to yourself. So if you're thinking about ideas about how you can lead yourself, I would invite you to consider setting your standards high and creating a vision to live into. I'm guessing that you have had leaders in the past, whether they're teachers, whether they're mentors, people in your life who have seen something in you and who have offered you an opportunity that has required you to grow in order to fulfill that opportunity. They may have asked you to do something that you never would have imagined for yourself, that seemed hard, that seemed out of reach at the time, but you stepped up and you made it happen. And I would invite you to set the vision high for yourself and for those who you choose to lead. I invite you to treat yourself with kindness. When you go after your big goals, when you fail to meet your expectations, when things are difficult, I invite you to extend kindness and grace to yourself. I invite you to extend those to others as well, but it starts with you. I invite you to see your own value. Again, this goes back to setting that vision and holding those standards high. Appreciate the value that you bring. I think sometimes we just don't see it. We cannot see it in ourselves. It's like we're fish in the water. We don't necessarily see the value we bring because it may come really easily, because it's something that we take for granted. It's something that we think everybody has. But I'd invite you to start looking for that value that you bring and to really look for it in others and to tell them what they do that you appreciate, because they may not see it in themselves either. I encourage you to adopt a growth mindset instead of a fixed mindset. When you are learning, when you are on that edge of growth, allow yourself to find in that process the learning opportunities. Where it is challenging, it is also an opportunity for you to learn and to expand. And instead of seeing challenges as signs that there's something wrong, look at those as areas where there's growth potential. I invite you to put compassion and curiosity ahead of judgment. This applies to you and it applies to others. When you fail to meet expectations, when you don't feel like doing the thing that is going to move you forward, when it feels hard or negative, instead of looking at yourself and others with judgment, I invite you to have compassion, to have curiosity. If, for example, you are listening to this podcast episode and thinking, oh, I should have taken that leadership opportunity, I didn't do that, ask yourself why. There's probably a pretty good reason as to why you didn't make that choice at a certain point in time. And if you can be compassionate with yourself and curious about the reasons, you can start there. Again, it's approaching with kindness how you choose to speak to yourself and how you choose to lead yourself and others as well. I invite you to consider committing to the relationship first. If you are a parent, if you are a mentor to others, you may have made a decision that you are going to place that relationship above all else. And I invite you to do that with yourself, that you develop a sense of self-trust, a relationship with yourself that is tight, so that no matter what happens, you are going to maintain that relationship. And so that is a relationship you want to have with you. That is a relationship that you want to have with those who you choose to lead. The relationship matters more than any of the ups and downs that happen along the way. And then finally, I would invite you to choose your language carefully. The way that you speak to yourself, the way that you speak to others has a huge influence. And if you would like some ideas on how to do that, I recorded a podcast episode called Being Your Own Best Boss. And there's some ideas there in terms of how you can show up as your own best boss and the way that you would want to speak to yourself. So that's suggestion number 2. Number 1 was to step into leadership, was to see yourself as a leader and to define it. Step number 2 is to lead yourself first. Step number 3 is to focus on what sets you apart instead of trying to fit in. So leaders around you may look a certain way, and you may be tempted to adopt their leadership style and make it your own. And what I would invite you to consider here is that there are leadership qualities that others have that you may choose to emulate. However, they may not fully capture what you are capable of. I invite you to ask yourself where you are in alignment and to ask yourself where you are not in alignment with the leadership style of others. I want you to be really honest with yourself and curious about the value that you bring, about the leadership style that you're capable of having. And what I noticed, and this goes back to some of the work that we did in the group mastermind and coaching program, was that each of the members came away with a clearer picture of the value that they were bringing to their work. And it was really almost like a deeper understanding. It's like they could see it before, but now they could see it almost with greater clarity. And once that clarity was there, then it becomes easier to lean into that strength, to lead into what that leadership looks like, to bring more of it with themselves into their professional work. And so for you, what I invite you to consider here is, what is that strength that you bring as a leader? And chances are it is unique to you. And so instead of trying to see how others are leading and taking on those characteristics, I invite you to think about what makes you different, what sets you apart. How are you distinguishing yourself as a leader? And how can you bring more of that to the work that you do? And what I would invite you to consider there is how through your influence, you are going to change things for the better. That is true leadership. Finally, when it comes to leadership, one of the most impactful ways that you can lead is by modeling. And if you're a parent, then maybe you've had that experience where, for all of us who've ever had parents, right? When you think about what they say you should do and what they actually do, it's how they act that is of greater influence than what they tell you to do. So, for example, if you have parents who say, don't eat the cookie, but then they go off and they eat the cookie, or, be kind to your sibling, but then they're not kind themselves, then that is what stays with you more so than just the words that they use. And so what I would invite you to think about is, how are you modeling what it is that you're trying to lead? If you're trying to say to others that you want them to set boundaries and you want them to think independently and you want them to see themselves in their highest light, you must first do those things for yourself. So what are some of the characteristics that you might choose to model? This really is an exercise for you to consider. What do you want to model as your unique form of leadership? Here are some ideas. Maybe what you want to model is how you can create excellence while still maintaining balance. You may want to model fairness in the way that you treat others and the way that you treat yourself. You may want to model steadiness. You may want to model how to set boundaries. You may want to model what it means to protect your team, honor your commitments, how to navigate stress with grace and with calm, and how to create opportunities for others. Those may be some of the skills and strengths and qualities as a leader that you want to demonstrate and model for others. So this is what I have to share with you today about leadership. So we talked about how, number one, you may not see yourself as a leader, and I'm inviting you to change that, to see why you as a leader matters. I would invite you to look at leadership as a choice, and for you to not think of leadership as something that exists outside of you, but as something that is available to you, a choice that you can make, that you can step into a role as leader. And finally, I invite you to consider the process of becoming a leader. And I've suggested a few ways that you might do that. Number one, by stepping into it, by defining it, and by acting from that place. Number two, by leading yourself first. So by taking leadership and by exerting those qualities in relation to yourself. I've invited you to focus on what sets you apart as a leader instead of trying to fit in and adopt somebody else's leadership style. And finally, I've invited you to model it, to model your form of leadership. You have everything you need right now to be a leader. It turns on your willingness to make a choice and to have the courage to set yourself apart, to be seen, and to have influence. When you choose to lead, you will create greater diversity in leadership. You will generate a heightened level of excellence, and you will open doors not only for yourself, but for everybody around you who finds inspiration from you and who chooses to lead themselves and others as a result. So, my friend, with that in mind, I invite you to think again to all the opportunities that you have to lead in your professional work, in your personal life, and to choose one of those things as a starting place to truly step into leadership. That is what I have for you today, my dear friend. I am so delighted that you chose to join me here today, and I am excited to see what happens when you choose leadership and the impact that you are going to create for yourself and for everybody around you. And with that, we will sign off, and I will so much look forward to reconnecting with you again next week. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.